This is the all-new Trek Rail Gen 5. It's a completely new frame with brand new geometry and Bosch's latest Gen 5 motor. It's also got a fully removable 800 watt-hour or 600 watt-hour battery. It weighs in around 24 kilos in the size XL that I've got here. It's a full carbon frame, and this GX Axis version also comes with a carbon wheel set and carbon bars. The geometry is trail and enduro oriented, and it has a ton of configuration options to fine tune the geo that I'll cover later on in the video. Now, I'm actually a big fan of the Trek Rail. I owned the previous 2 generations. My first rail was the Gen 2, which I bought the lowest spec alloy bike they sold, and it was one of my favourite e-bikes around the time. I did quite a few mods to it to get it to my liking. This one had the side removable 625 watt-hour battery with great geometry, but had a few of the old school parts from Bosch, like that big LED display. When Trek bought out the Generation 3, I bought one of the very first that was available in the UK, the 9.8 XT. This new one had Bosch's bigger 750 watt-hour battery and the LED bar controller, but it was mostly unchanged apart from the bigger battery and getting a little bit longer in the reach. Gen 4 was really a minor change. They added Bosch's top tube system controller and the smaller Bluetooth remote controller. Now we move over to Gen 5, which is a completely revised bike. So I've been super excited to get out on this one. It's the first look. I've done maybe 4 or 5 rides on it, ridden on my local trails, but let's have a detailed look around the bike. And if you want to see a full review later on, subscribe to the channel if you want to be the first to see it. First thing you might notice is it looks far beefier than the outgoing model, with big oversized carbon tubes. So I think firstly, one of the big changes is its mullet. For the first time, they've always done a 29-29. Now this is 29 at the front, 27.5 out the rear. Now, even as a taller rider, I'm 6'3", I really do prefer mullets now, especially if the chain stays long enough, it's not crazy short, because it just means on the steeper stuff I can get right over the back and get no kind of tyre buzz on my butt, and they just feel a little bit more lively and a little bit more, they're lighter out the back, the wheel is smaller, the tyre is smaller, there's less rotational mass. So mullets I'm a massive fan of, and in the past I've always thought I'm tall, I should ride 29-29s. It's not until I've been riding mullets more and more I've started to really enjoy them, and that is my preference now. So I'm really glad to see that this is a mullet. It's got 160 at the front and 160 at the rear. So they've upped the rear travel. It was 150, it's gone up to 160. And although the front is 160, Trek actually say you can run up to a 180 fork on there. Would slacken it out a little bit, but I'll come on to that because there's some things that you can do to the head angle, and I'll talk a bit about that later. And then one of the big changes is the battery. So they had 625 in the past, then they went up to 750. So we'll take an 800 or a 600. The down tube does look quite fat on this compared to some of the slimline ones, something like the Santa Cruz Vala or maybe the Orbea Wild that have a fixed internal 600 watt-hour battery. Personally, I really like to change batteries. In fact, some of the rides we do, we use 2 batteries now. And they're big rides, all dayers, but it's nice to have that kind of hot swappable battery. And I would really find it a struggle to buy a bike that didn't have a removable battery. I really want to be able to remove the battery for a double battery day, or just charging indoors, bringing it in over the winter. So I do really like the removable battery. And finally, they've got rid of the key for the battery. So battery removal, super simple. It's a 6mm Allen key. Couldn't get any easier really. Just turn this, it's got a little catch on it, and you just press this latch and the battery comes out. Now the 800 is quite a big chunky battery. What they did, Bosch, with the 800 is they tried to make it shorter and fatter, and this was down to a lot of discussions with manufacturers to keep the weight low, because when you create a battery that's really long, it can put the battery weight really kind of far up and high, and then your kind of center of like gravity or your kind of mass is high, and in my experience with that, it creates a weird kind of tipping sensation on bikes. So that is why they kept this battery kind of shorter and fatter. There's always compromises, isn't there, with bike design and battery design, and all these things are kind of competing against each other, because aesthetically it does mean the bike has a bit of a more bulbous down tube, but that's something that I can take when I'm riding it. I'm more thinking about the ride experience and the handling of the bike, how long I can ride for, how easy it is to swap, but also looks are a really important part of mountain biking. Whether you like it or not, they definitely are. We like things that look visually pleasing. So we've got Bosch's Gen 5 motor system. It is really outstanding. The Gen 5, I love it. It's quiet, smooth, predictable. It's pretty efficient. It's just, I think, a great all-rounder, possibly the outright best e-bike motor overall on the market, because the blend of like power and efficiency, battery life, the smoothness of it, the predictability of it. When you climb, it's easy to get up super steep stuff without spinning the rear wheel, and that's really important. Now, compared to something like the DJI, which is monstrously powerful, but sometimes it's quite difficult to lay down that power on steep stuff. Compared to this, I think on steep loose climbs, this has a more predictable way of delivering the power. So whilst it has nowhere near the outright grunt of something like the DJI, just the way it's super refined at climbing, it just feels like a more complete, refined package to me. It's all software based and all this could change, but I think with this motor, Bosch have done a fantastic job of creating a really polished drive system. Now, there are some things that allegedly people talk about being updated real soon, maybe some power differences. Definitely something's going on with the top tube, because there's a cutout. You can see it's got this plate around here for whatever's coming out, hopefully soon, because this is pretty basic, let's be honest. In 2025, this looks, yeah, a bit old school compared to what else is out on the market now. So the geometry on this is like an enduro style geometry, 64.5 degree head angle, but you can actually get an angle adjust headset from Trek. So a proper official Trek part, and you can slacken it down to 63.5 degrees, or you can steepen it up by 1 degree. But saying that, there's a few different things you can do to change the geometry. And actually Trek's chart, there's like pages and pages of different options, depending on whether you run it with like a 160 fork, a 170 or a 180 in the default position, slack or a +1. And then there's a couple of adjustments on the bike that you can do. So just in here, we've got the little Mino link. Flip that round and it will raise the bottom bracket. Now, actually, you probably might wonder if you could fit a 29 in here. Trek say you can't. There's not much tyre clearance down there at all, so I don't think you could, but it's going to raise a BB a little bit. And then just down here, you've got that little progressivity adjustment chip. So you'll just flip that round and it will make the rear shock or the rear kind of leverage curve less progressive or more progressive. I've just got it in the less progressive, which is kind of fine for the air shock. Notice this kind of speckled paint on here, by the way. When I first saw it, I wasn't too sure of it, but actually I quite like it. It just adds a little bit of texture, a little bit of detail down there. And then it slowly kind of just has a hard cut off there where it goes into it's almost like a satin matte finish integrated mudguard, which is quite cool. This is a Trek part, so it's like super factory, super OEM, and that extends kind of right down to this piece here just under the rear wheel. So we've got 160 of rear travel, and it's using Trek's ABP, they call it. It's like an active braking pivot. So it's got like a concentric like pivot through there. Trek say that what that does is it means when you're braking, you still get good suspension performance. It's not kind of giving you this brake jack and locking up. this one is priced in the UK at £7,750, and that's full carbon frame. Interestingly, it actually comes with a carbon wheel set, which is pretty decent. GX axis. The spec on it is all right, actually. Now, I say all right, it is £7,750, which is a lot of money. But I think this year we're going to see high bike prices, like especially with like the flagship bikes that are coming out. So £7,750 for this spec, I think is pretty decent. 800 battery, Bosch Gen 5, carbon wheel set. The tyres that it comes with, like the Trek Brevard, I think they're called, they're actually pretty decent as well. I just wanted to try these Schwalbe radial tyres. I've got the Magic Mary and the Shredder on the front, which is unbelievable. Superb amount of grip, but loads of rolling resistance, and actually it's getting into spring in the UK, so I'll definitely be taking that one off. It's disappointing that there's not SRAM Mavens on this. Now, an enduro bike like this should come with decent brakes, and I think there's a bit of a miss there. I reckon they got a really good deal on some cheap codes that were left over, but they don't suit this bike. If this was mine, it'd be the first thing that I would change. The fork on it is actually a really decent fork. It's a Fox 38 Performance Elite. It doesn't have the X2 damper, the new one from Fox, but the damping on it I found really good, so the fork is actually pretty decent performer. Now for me, I'd definitely change it to a 170 out the front, or put a different air shaft in it, which would be quite a cheap upgrade if you wanted something that's a bit more like fully enduro focused. A 160 e-bike, it has a wide or a very broad application use. You could ride around here on forest tracks. 160 forks start to get a little bit more uncomfortable on some steeper enduro tracks when you ride in heavier e-bikes. Actually comes with carbon bars as well, which again, like full carbon frame, wheels, bars, it's pretty decent. I would definitely have sacrificed something like carbon bars for a better brake set. So yeah, not massively impressed with these. The factory bleed is rubbish. The throw is ridiculously far. There's not much adjustability, but overall I just don't think the power's quite there. As long as you're not smashing into a rock super hard with low pressure and causing catastrophic damage, carbon rims are just one of those items that they're just a set and forget, whereas alloy just needs a little bit more kind of care and attention. If you're wondering about this tyre, this is the Shredder rear on the front, which I think is much, much better than the Shredder front. The Shredder front has got way too aggressive V-shaped knobs sticking out like that, and there's quite a lot of tram lining. There's no centre block, whereas this one actually has a centre block, which makes it much easier to turn. And it's still like massive. Look at the blocks on it. It's crazy big blocks for massive grip in super loose loam and mud. So the rear, this is a little charging flap here. It's kind of alright. It's not as nice as the previous gen. That was like flush with the frame and painted. It looked more finished. They've almost taken a step backwards, dare I say it, on that. Just, yeah, I mean, it serves a purpose. Just feels a little bit kind of flimsy and cheaper. Maybe it was a cost-saving exercise, I don't know, but it's got to be a reason for that. And again, strangely, it's running a magnet on the rear rotor, and you can see the speed sensor cable comes out just here. I don't know why they're doing that, because lots of brands now are using magnets on the actual valve, on the valve core, so you don't need extra cables and stuff. Must be a reason for it. Again, I don't know why, but I'd have much preferred to see less cables coming out of here and just the magnetic valve mount that Bosch do, which nearly all e-bikes have now. So huge, great big chainstay, like really thick, a little bit of protection on there, and massive like seat stay. They're just really chunky in comparison to lots of other e-bikes out there. The shape is almost like rectangular rather than a small circular piece. So just popped in the hardest gear. Oh, nice little feature as well. The axis derailleur is hardwired into the motor, so you never need to worry about an axis battery. It gets its power from the main battery, which is, yeah, massive win. All right, so you can see just how close the chain goes to the chainstay. So when you're riding, there's a lot of knock-in. It may or may not bother you at all. Me, I can hear it and it's slightly bothersome, but it does run really close, and I can hear a lot of that when I'm going down hills. And again, talking about like carbon size, and this is massive girthy like seat stay on there. It's absolutely huge. So there you go, first look at the new Trek rail. I've got this for a while, so I'll definitely be riding it a lot. and I'll make an update video a bit later on. Subscribe if you want to be the first to see that. Take care, catch you soon.